Today's daf we're going to learn is Moed Katan daf Yud Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruth Rotenberg in loving memory of her daughter Taniel Miller on her 17th yahrzeit. Today we celebrate and commemorate Taniel's short and powerful life. She loved learning Israel and doing chesed. Today's daf is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in loving memory of her parents' yahrzeit this week. Firma bat Esther Florence and Baruch ben Hinda Bernard Stillman. They always encouraged me to follow my dreams and believed I could do whatever I put my mind to. They would have supported my learning wholeheartedly, and my dad would have joined with me. Today's daf is sponsored by Esther Judith Tider Schwartz in loving memory of her grandmother, Esther Laufer Tider, Esther Bat Sinai and Chaya Laufer, who lost her life in the Lodz ghetto on the 23rd of Shvat, 5701, 1941. Today's daf is sponsored by Becky and Rena Baumel, a loving memory of their grandmother Shirley on her yahrzeit. She was a pioneer of women's advanced education, a true adventurer, and a devoted friend. Baba, we love you and miss you. Today's daf is sponsored by Helen Lewis in honor of her daughter Miriam Kunin's birthday. Happy birthday to my wonderful daughter Miriam Kunin, and thank you to all her teachers, Chom Pardes, Drisha, Hadar, and all of her Ruta partners across the world for helping her to learn Torah with such enthusiasm and joy. Okay, with those long dedications and beautiful dedications, we're going to start our daf today. We learned at the end of yesterday's daf and the Mishnah that, I'll just read it quickly, Machanis Adam Perotav Mipnei Ganavim V'Sholeh Pishtano Min HaMishcha B'Shvil Shelo Tovad. If you have to take something in from the fields because it's going to get ruined, or thieves are going to take them, so right, or where you're soaking the flax, or the fruit's going to get stolen, so you're allowed to bring it in. That's called Davar Ha'aved, under one condition, Bilvad Shelo Yechaven Et Melachto B'Moed. You can't specifically say, I'm doing this on Chol Hamoed, I'm pushing it off, right? We saw a good story with that at the end of yesterday's daf. And if you pushed off your malacha till the Chol Hamoed, then yovedu, which we said it wasn't exactly clear how to translate. Does this mean it's a curse, or we'll see that Rashi translates it here, the Rashi that's on the printed Rashi, not the real Rashi, sha'asur lehenot mehem. One is not allowed to benefit. And from that issue is going to rise the next question, which is, we start now from the bottom. What we talked about at the end here was, as long as there was a bright that said, as long as you bring your fruits in bitsina, when we allow it, it's only secret, right? We said nighttime is actually more public than daytime for this, at least according in this one situation. Now we're going to read, Sholet Pishtano Min HaMishcha, 2 lines from the bottom of your bet on the bet. Rabbi Yirmiyah, remember Rabbi Yirmiyah, he's the person who always says, what if? He loves these what if questions. I always remember when I think of him, I think when I was a kid, I used to always ask, what if this happens, or how come? And my parents used to kind of make fun of me a little bit. So that's the way I view Rabbi Yirmiyah. He likes to just ask every single possibility. What happens if? So we learned now that you can't benefit from work you did on Chol Hamoed. So if I took care of something, I'm not allowed to benefit from it on Chol Hamoed. It sounds a lot like Shabbat. If you remember, we learned about Shabbat. Malacha is done by a Jew on Shabbat. You can't benefit from it. This is similar, although again, this isn't necessarily D'oraita, and it's not, right, where we draw the line is not so clear, because here we're actually talking about Malacha that you were allowed to do, but you pushed it off. In other words, it is Davar Ha'aved. It's in the category of permitted Malacha, but you intentionally didn't do it on before the holiday, and that's your problem. So what if you push off your malacha to Chol Hamoed and you do it on Chol Hamoed, which is not allowed, and the rabbis forbade it and said, well, you're penalized, you can't benefit from it. What if you die? Your heirs, are they allowed to use it? Is the punishment on you, or is the punishment on your possessions, which means that when your children inherit your possessions, that will end up, it will be on them. Imtim Tzalomar. Now he continues with this question. He says, if you want to learn it from the following case, we're going to see 2 other cases, and each time he's going to say it's not a fair comparison. Tzaram Ozim Bechol. This is a case of a firstborn animal goes to the Kohen. The Kohen has to sacrifice it in the temple. If there's no temple, or if he doesn't want to sacrifice it in the temple, once it's blemished, the Kohen can sacrifice it normally and eat it. But what if he intentionally puts a blemish on the animal? We penalize him that he can't benefit from that animal. Okay, that's a penalty. So now, that penalty, kansu b'no chalav. His son also can't benefit from that animal if the person were to die. But we can't learn it from there necessarily, because you could say, mishum d'isura d'oraita. That's forbidden by Torah law, and this is not. Now, what do you mean this isn't forbidden by Torah law? Remember, does this maybe help prove the side that says that Malacha and Chol Moed is not forbidden by Torah law? Not necessarily. You could either say, if you hold Malacha and Chol Moed is not from the Torah, then you could say, oh, here's your proof. Look, it says Malacha and Chol Moed isn't from the Torah because it's comparing. That's Torah, this is not. Alternatively, if you think, remember we talked about that there's a big machloket about it. Again, I'll refer back to Gefet if you want to learn this better. First Gefet on Moed Katan last week's was specifically on that famous machloket. Number two, the issue is that if the way to understand it according to that interpretation is, while malacha might be asur mida oraita, we're talking here about work done in a way that was permitted because it's davar ha'aved. You're going to have a loss. Your flax is soaking, and if you don't take it out, it's going to get ruined. The issue is that you pushed it off. Because you pushed it off, then it's only rabbinic. In other words, it's rabbinic because it's not malacha that's forbidden from the Torah law, because it is davar ha'aved, it's going to get ruined. The issue here is that you pushed it off and you intentionally waited till the holiday to do it. That's your problem. That's not malacha mida oraita. So even if you hold it in general, one can't do malacha on a Torah level, but all those people still hold there's exceptions, which is if there's going to be a financial loss. So if that's the case, again, here we're not talking about the malacha that would be forbidden by Torah law, the an chol hamoed. Okay, so there's two different ways to read here. In any case, he says like this. Number one, if you want to try to learn it from Saramos and Bechor, where we do penalize the son, that's different because that's Torah and this is not. That's also different, and we'll see why in a minute, but let's explain what the case is. You have avadim kna'anim, that means Canaanite slaves is a whole category we see many times. If you're new to Gemara, or if you don't remember, I'll explain it again, which is somebody, those days, the Jews often had these Canaanite slaves, they were called, which were non-Jewish slaves that basically undergo a process. They do a brit milah before they come into your house if they're male, and they become somewhat Jewish. Okay, what does it mean? They're obligated, they become part of your household, so they have to keep mitzvot, but they don't keep mitzvot that are time-bound because their time is not their own. They have to, right, they have a job, they work they're a slave. Okay, again, we're not going to get into slave, and right, it was a different kind of time, but they work for their owners. They have certain rights, so just so you know, right, there's all sorts of rights for these slaves. We don't treat them like maybe in other cultures slaves were treated. Again, they weren't necessarily, they still were slaves. Call a spade, but again, understood their historical context. They were basically owned by the owner, and they had to do mitzvot. That's the main thing for our purposes. If you're not supposed to free a slave like that, if you do free them, they actually become automatically a full-fledged Jew. They're obligated in all mitzvot, so they kind of become Jewish. They undergo some sort of conversion process. And now what happens is, you sold this slave, which you're not allowed to do. Not only can you not free them, you can't sell them to a Gentile because now they're Jewish somewhat. They're obligated in mitzvot. And by selling them to a Gentile owner, you're going to basically preclude them from being able to do their mitzvot, right? How are you going to keep Shabbat? How are you going to do all sorts of things when you're owned by a Gentile slave owner? So if you want to say someone who sold their slave to an Ovei Kochavim Vamet, and then the person died, now it's before you even get to the person dying. If you do that, you're obligated to redeem them from the slave owner. So you sold the slave for, let's say, 1,000 shekels. I'm just putting a random number out there. You have to buy that person back, even if he sells it to you for 10,000 shekels. Some people say even 100 times the amount. You have to buy them back, and you also can't use them anymore. They can't be your slave. Okay, that's your penalty for having sold them. And if you die, according to the halacha, kansu b'no achahav, your son also has to redeem and can't use the slave anymore. So you could say that's different. Because why do we penalize the son? Because there's a separate issue going on here. Mishum dekamav kelei mitzvot. You're preventing every day that you don't redeem that slave, you're preventing that slave from doing mitzvot. And since they're obligated in mitzvot, because they underwent some type of conversion, basically, then, right, I say some type, because it's not the same as a regular convert. But you're basically not allowing them to do all the mitzvot that are not time-bound. So, hachamai, but now, so we brought those two cases. Rabbi Yehuda says it can't be like, you can't really learn it from there. That's unique because it's still right. You can't really learn it from there. That's unique because that you're preventing the person from doing mitzvot. However, right, so the question really becomes, hachamai, what is the situation by us? Again, what were we up to? Because now we got sidetracked. We're talking about someone who does work on Chol Hamoed can't benefit from the work done, but maybe their children can. Do we say, Hachamai Gavra Kanis Rabbanan? Is the penalty on the person, V'ha'ite, and the person, right? We're now, V'halete, the person's not here anymore. O Dilma Mamona Kanis Rabbanan, or is it a financial thing? Meaning it's on your possessions. This is what we often call a Chefza Gavra distinction. Chayfetz on the object or on the Gavra, on the person. It's on the person's not here anymore. If it's on the possessions, whatever they did work on, well, then the object is still here. Possessions are here, the field is here, whatever it might be. The flax is here. So then you could. And it's just a matter of who owns it at this point. So Amar Le. Rabbi Seir answers Sim Tani Chua. Let's learn it from the following source, and we're going to learn it from a case of Shemitah. If you remember, in the beginning of our Masechet, the first Mishnah, and many of the other ones after that in the first chapter, compared Shemitah and a work on Chol Hamoed. So we're going to learn it from Shemitah. It says in the following source, okay, it's a Mishnah in Shvi'it. If you took thorns out of the ground and you got it ready for planting by removing thorns, it's not really work. So we're going to say, you can plant that land after the Shemitah year is over. Nitaiba or nidaira, but if you put fertilizer on it, or you move the animals to kind of dwell there, nidaira, we had this yesterday, remember you can't put your animals, I forgot to mention, the word midaira comes from ladul, dayal, to live, okay? And a deer is a pen of an animal. It's like you made the pen there in the field so that they would put their dung everywhere and end up fertilizing the field, which you're not allowed to do on Shemitah. So if you do that, lo tizara l'motzei shvit, you can't benefit from this, and therefore you can't plant this land the following year. Now, we don't know anything about what if you die. Well, here comes Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, who's also a Tana, and he says, Naktina, we learn, Hey tivava mate benozo, we don't penalize the son. If you did this fertilizing, the son can actually plant it. We don't penalize you. Alma, what do you see from here? L'dide kansu rabbanan, the borelo kansu rabbanan. It's not a penalty on the field or on, right, whatever it is that you did. It's a penalty on the person. If the person dies, we don't penalize the child. So hachinami, just like there, l'dide kansu rabbanan, also here. Person's penalized, libere lo kansu rabbanan, but not their son. Amar Abaye. Now we're going to have another halacha that's similar. Timei taharotav vamet. If I took your vessels or your food and I made it impure, now let's say you're a kohen, that's going to mess you up for all sorts of things. So if I do that to you and then I die, lo kansu b'no acharav. Okay, basically what they say is I have to give you the money back. It's as if I ruined it. It's as if I broke it, even though I didn't break it. Okay, now it's a penalty, but it's a penalty that doesn't go through to the son. It's the same kind of idea. So now they explain my time. Why is it that it's only a knas? Maybe I really did ruin your kli because I made it tameh. Why don't I have to pay you by law and only by penalty? And why are we only penalizing me and not my son? So they say, or my child. So they say my time. Hezek she'eno nikar lo shmei hezek. This is a strange kind of damage. Damages normally would be I took your vessel and I broke it and it's in shards now. That's an obvious, noticeable difference. If I make it impure, it's not a noticeable seen to the eye difference. You can't, it's the same, it looks like the same vessel, just happens to have a status of tumah on it. That's a different category of damages. That category of damages, I'm not liable for, okay, by law. However, the rabbis instituted a penalty because I really did potentially mess up, depending, I guess, if you're a kohen, if you want to eat food in it, all sorts of things. I've messed it up for you. So therefore, lidide kansu rabbanan, liberelo kansu rabbanan. So here's another situation where we're only penalizing the child. We're not penalizing the parent, the person who did it. We're not penalizing their heirs. New Mishnah. You can't decide, I'm going to buy my house, I'm going to close on my house on Chol Hamoed. You can't buy slaves, animals. These are big purchases, right? Can't do this on Chol Hamoed unless you have no place to live and you want to buy the house right now so you can move in, right? You need it for the holiday, or you need the slaves for the holiday. You need the food for the animal for the holiday, right? There definitely could be situations where one would need it for the holiday. If it's for the purpose of the holiday, yes. If it's not, you can't. Oh, but there's one more exception. This is a very interesting one. It could also be l'tzorach hamoed in a different way. Let's say you're buying, okay, I was thinking about the first time there was a big closure in Israel for Corona, it was around the time of Pesach. And there were a lot of people who had stores and were at a huge financial loss, right? Likely they couldn't even afford to buy food for Pesach. So if someone, let's say, during that closure was selling food in a way that was permitted, right? And they were selling out of their house, and they were selling clothing, and you didn't really need clothing for the holiday, or they were selling their house because, what they needed the money desperately. So you could buy it from them to allow them to have money to buy food for the holiday. So it's a little more indirect because it's not a direct, I need this for the holiday, but that person needs the money so they can buy food for the holiday. So we're going to permit it. To which the Gemara is going to ask a very interesting question. This seems to imply that what? You could sell something. Now let's look from the perspective of the seller, because we were looking right now from the perspective of the buyer. What kind of things can I buy? What it's basically telling you is you can sell if you need the money to buy food for the holiday. So comes Rava and asks Rav Nachman the following question. Today's going to be a lot of questions that are asked as opposed to, let's say, difficulties raised. There will be difficulties raised, but there's a lot of questions asked on today's stuff, right? We started with a question where Rabbi Yomi, Rabbi Zeri. So what if, right? So we're going to have a lot of questions. Rava asked Rav Nachman, you said in the Mishnah that we could sell, but am I allowed to work? We said yesterday you can't work for money on Chol Moed. So now what if I need the money? Can I do labor, work for the day labor? Can I do that on Chol Moed if I need the money to buy food for the holiday? So Amar Le, he says to him, Rav Nachman says, let's learn it from the Mishnah. Tanina, it says in the Mishnah, O litzorach hamoed she'en lo ma yochal. Now he seems to be implying that it could have just said, O litzorach hamocher she'en lo ma yochal, or for the needs of the seller who doesn't have what to eat. So now they say you could have theoretically said, or for the needs of the mocher, if the mocher needs the money. Why does it say she'en lo ma yochal? That seems unnecessary. It would be obvious. What does it mean, l'tzorach hamocher? For the purpose of the seller, if he needs the money for food, or she needs the money for food. So, la'atuye mai. So the second part of that sentence, what is it coming to teach? It must be coming to teach something additional. Not only that, but extra words always mean we're going to include another case. My lav la'atuye schar pula does not mean to include someone who's working. That you can get a job, a day labor job, not just selling. You can think that they're distinguishing. Selling is not actually labor, right? People who work in a store all day might say that's labor, but they mean the difference between selling a house and going to work and working as a worker for the day. So that's what he says. Let's learn it from the Mishnah. Amar Le, Rava says to him, that's not a good proof. Lo perusha kamefaresh, isn't it just explaining what does it mean, litzorech hamochel? It means if he needs the food if he needs the money to buy food. That isn't unnecessary words. Those words are necessary. So he doesn't accept that as an answer. So Rava seems to be implying that he thinks you can't work, to which Abaye questions it. Eitivei Abaye. He says further on in our Masechet, Ein kotvin shtarei chov b'moed. If I loan you money, we can't write out a contract. Okay, we can't write an IOU on Chol Moed. Not permitted. I can lend you money, but not with a contract. Because you're not supposed to write unless it's necessary. So they say this isn't necessary. However, but if I don't trust you and I think you're not going to return the money unless I write a contract, then it's allowed. Or what if, this is very interesting, what if the sofer, okay, the people who write the contracts, because in those days not everybody wrote, you would go to someone, you'd hire them to write it out. What if he needs the money? Then you're allowed to write it, okay? It's a big heter. Now, what does that come to include? What is he doing? He's doing labor, right? That would seem to indicate that you can hire someone for labor if they need the money. So Abaye basically says, I don't agree with you, Rava, that you think not. This seems to imply yes. Shma mina. And this really does seem to imply that. Motiv Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet's now going to bring a question, okay, back to the answer that Rav Nachman gave. Okay, Rav Nachman had said that it seems to imply you could work, okay, and that's what Abaye just seemed to say against Rava. Rav Sheshet's now going to question that from a Mishnah in Psachim. The Chachamim omrim shalosh umaniyot. We're now talking about Erev Pesach. Remember, we had a whole discussion about Erev Pesach, all sorts of work that one can do or not do on Erev Pesach. So Chachamim Omrim, Shalosh Umaniyot Osim Malacha Ba'arvei Pesachim Al Chatzot. There's 3 people who are allowed to work in the morning until midday. Who are those 3 type of workers? Hachayatin, the tailors, seamstresses, hasaparin, haircutters, hairdressers, vehakofsim, and the launderers. Why? Hachayatin sheken hediot tofer kedercho b'cholosh hamoed. We're going to say the tailors because theoretically, forget about Erev Yantif, you can even do that on Chol HaMoed. If I need to stitch up a button falls off, I can sew it in a regular way, not in a professional way. But since it's permitted, and here's going to be the key, since it's permitted in a potential, there's one way you can do it, which is in a regular manner and not in a professional manner. We're going to even allow the professionals to do this on Erev Pesach. In other words, since it's allowed on Chol HaMoed in a particular manner, we're permitted on Yudalit in its normal manner. That's going to be the logic of these next things. Hasaparin v'akofsim, hairdressers and launderers, sheken haba'im midinat hayam, v'yotzei mibeit ha'asurim, mutarim l'saper u'lechabes b'cholosh hamoed. We're going to end with this today in the next chapter, which is hairdressers and launderers are allowed under certain circumstances to work on Chol HaMoed. If somebody came from abroad and their hair is, they look disheveled, you're allowed to cut their hair or wash their clothes when they get here, even if it's on Chol HaMoed. And someone who gets out of jail, okay, those people, if you get out of jail on Chol HaMoed and you look all disheveled, you're allowed to take care of yourself, your clothes, your hair, etc. So these people have a way they can work on Chol HaMoed. Therefore, we're going to permit them in a normal manner on Erev Chag. Now, what does this have to do with our case? Because again, what's the logic here? If it's permitted in some way on Chol HaMoed, we'll permit it in its normal way before. So, now, if you think that there's a permitted way for you to do this, which is if you need the money desperately, you're allowed to work as a day laborer, then what would you say in this Mishnah? Every single job should be permitted to do on Yudalid in the morning on the 14th, Erev Chag, because since there's potentially a way to do it if you have no money and you need the money for food, you're allowed to work, then it would basically permit every single job in Yudalid according to the logic of that Mishnah. So therefore, he says that can't possibly be. So now, okay, what's the issue with Erev Chag? Let me just relate to it because I see you're asking. The issue is that you're supposed to be getting ready for Pesach. Okay, we had a whole thing there, if you remember. This is where we got into Makom Shana Agu. There was a debate. There was a different customs about whether people didn't work in the morning or did work in the morning. There was a whole discussion about it, about working on the day before Pesach, because you really also remember when they did the sacrifice, it was actually its own holiday in and of itself, because Yudalid was a day that they were actually sacrificing the Korban Pesach. So there's a whole different reasons given, whether it's preparation for the Chag, specifically Korban related, but it's clear that there's something unique about that day, and it's specifically Pesach, not other holidays, either because of the Korban, the sacrifice, or because it was a day that just required, we all know what Erev Pesach is like, it requires a lot more preparations than some of the other holidays, so that's in a nutshell. Okay, now getting back. Matkifla Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, now, he seems to be, okay, there's a bit of a debate about who Rav Papa's questioning, but it seems that he and Ravina are now going to contradict what Rav Sheshet just said and basically say, Rav Sheshet, your proof is not a good proof. You're trying to say that from that Mishnah, you can infer, since these 3 jobs were permitted because there's a way to do them on Chol HaMoed, it should have been permitted every single job because there's a way to do them on Chol HaMoed. Well, Matkefla Rav Papa, Elameata, Binyan Lishtere, he says you're going to get to ridiculous assumptions according to what you're saying, right? Buildings should be permitted. Now, he says to Rav Sheshet, look, I understand you want to say, right, we can't, if we were right that you could actually work, then, right, and do anything for money, if you need the money desperately, then that would fit into here. He says, but no, you can't take those 3 examples and learn from there to everything, because otherwise buildings should be allowed, because we already learned, if you remember, if your kotel, your wall is about to fall down, on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to rebuild it. So why don't we say building is allowed, right? Go build your house on Erev Pesach, because there is a way that you could build a wall on Chol HaMoed if it was dangerous and was going to fall on somebody. So therefore, let's permit it on Erev Chag. Nobody says that. And Matkifla Ravina brings another one. Why doesn't it say in the Mishnah that a sofer, a scribe can do it? Because if a woman needs to, if they do an engagement, that's kiddushin is their engagement, or which we said you could do on Chol Moed, right? You can't get married, but you can do the engagement because maybe someone else will pick her up and want to marry her instead, or gitin or shovarim, right? There's certain cases where you could write a receipt for things. All that is permitted. So why don't we say then on Erev Chag, you can allow a sofer. So he says, they both say, Rav Sheshet, your logic as to rejecting this idea that you could actually, if you could actually do labor, you want to reject it because it should have been in the Mishnah. Well, these things also should have been in the Mishnah and they're not. So comes Rav Ashi and he explains the Mishnah in a better way, which then drops Rav Sheshet's proof. Okay, we don't end up with an answer, but we do drop Rav Sheshet's proof from this Mishnah. Ela Amar Rav Ashi, Moed Arba'asar Karamit. You're comparing Chol Moed and the 14th of Nisan. They're not comparable. Okay, you're trying to bring a contradiction between them, and try to say that. He says, Moed mishum tirchahu ubimkom seda sharu Rabbanan. Moed, the whole issue Chol Moed, we don't want you to work too hard, and because of that loss, we're going to permit it. And therefore, if you're right, you can talk about maybe if you're stuck and you need the money, maybe we can permit it. There's ways to permit it. But Arba'asar mishum tzarach yom tofu. The whole reason for the 14th, and he's basically going to say it's not, the real reason why it's permitted is not really what it says in that Mishnah there. Okay? He says, Arba'asar, why do we permit these melachot? What's unique about them, right? If I had asked you before we read any farther than the first line, hachayatim, asaparim, and the kofsim, why are they permitted to work on the 14th? Because they're needed for the holiday. You need to get a haircut before the holiday, right? First of all, you can't do it during the holiday. You need to do your laundry before the holiday, and you need clean clothes. You need to look nice for the holiday. Lots of people get haircuts before the holiday. And right, forget about Sfirat HaOmer, but we're not talking about that on Erev Pesach. But the idea here is that we're going to allow you, right, that's a whole later, the Sfirat HaOmer is a whole separate thing. But anyway, it's for the holiday. You need your clothes tailored and fixed. So that's why we allow it. And therefore, Midi Ditzarach Yom Tov Sharu Rabbanan. Anything that was for the need of Yom Tov on the 14th, you're allowed to do, of course. And things that weren't for the purpose of Zivad, that's why they didn't allow you to bill. That's why they didn't allow you to have a sofer. That's why they didn't. And even if you say that potentially one can do any kind of job on Chol Moed, you still wouldn't be allowed to do it on your Dalit unless it's for the need of the holiday. So therefore, we don't really have an answer to this question, but we definitely don't have a proof for what the answer is. Okay, and then he would have, now the problem is that what he says doesn't really fit the wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah there says, these are allowed because you could do it on Chol Moed, right? So he would have to say, the main reason they're allowed is because they're Litzarach Yom Tov. The Mishnah added an additional thing, which was in addition to that, these also have a potential way to do them on Chol Moed, so all the more so we're allowed to do them. It's not the central reason. You have to wonder why they left out the central reason. But again, if I had stopped right when I read that first line, I had asked you all would have said, it's because people need those people to work on Erev Chag, and that's why they're working, right? It's like when you go on Erev Chag or Erev Shabbat, you go to the stores, right? Some stores in Israel, particularly, obviously outside of Israel, this wouldn't be the case. But in Israel, many, many businesses are closed. But any businesses that people need because it's a Friday and it's Erev Shabbat, all the food stores, right? All those places are still open. And obviously some other stores too, because it's people's day off and they can go shopping. But for sure, when you're talking about many people don't work on Friday in Israel, but the ones that are needed for the weekend, for sure, people are working. Next Mishnah, again, talking about things this is schlepping items from one place to another. If you need to move things, don't move them on Chol Moed. You can't bring it from house to house, but you can bring it into your courtyard. We'll have to see where your courtyard is situated momentarily. If you brought something to a craftsman to fix, okay, or you brought your laundry to the laundromat, or you brought whatever it might be to some specialist who deals with those things, you can't bring your kelim. Let's say you have a broken vessel, you brought it to be fixed. You can't bring it home on Chol Moed. Okay, you can't say, I'm picking this up for Chol Moed. Im choshesh lahen, but what if you're worried that someone's going to steal it from the uman? You're worried, right? You gave it to this person, and you're worried that what if he gets robbed on Chol Moed? If you're worried somehow that he's not going to protect it so well, he might know how to fix your kli, but you're worried it'll get stolen from there. Like, I'll give you an example, right? You bring your car to a garage, and then it's a holiday and nobody's there and nobody's protecting it. And, what if someone steals it from there, right? Outside my house, maybe less likely. I don't know if that's really true, but, to a certain extent, it's in some place, nobody lives there, it's in an industrial zone and it's the holiday and nobody's around, it might be more likely it would get stolen. So then you can bring it home, okay? But what do? You can't actually bring it home according to the Mishnah. You bring it to the closest courtyard. Okay, we'll see what if there is no courtyard that's protected, that's nearby. But they say basically bring it to the closest safe spot that you can. Don't bring it all the way home. Right? You wonder if this Mishnah would be different in a time where there's cars. Forget about my example of the car, but I mean, right, the idea is schlepping things. You stick it in the car and you bring it in your house. It's not much of a bother. And it really doesn't matter if you bring it to a closer spot or not, because in the end, you have to put it in the car and take it out of the car. So this would be a little bit different nowadays, probably. Now they raise a question on the first line. It says you can't bring it from a house to house, but you can bring it from house to courtyard. What if my courtyard's across the road? I'm allowed to bring it to there? So they say, we mean if your house has a courtyard connected to it, that kind of courtyard you can bring it to. If I own a courtyard down the block or 3 blocks away, I can't bring it to that courtyard. It doesn't mean house to house versus house to courtyard. No, it means house to house, meaning the houses are not right near each other. And house to courtyard is allowed because the courtyard is part of the house. Rava gave us a test, Rav Papa says. He tested us by giving a contradiction between this Mishnah and the following Mishnah. And the following Braita. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, you can't go collect your items that you left somewhere. But that contradicts the following source. You can bring them to the craftsman and you can take them home from the craftsman on Chol Moed, even if it's not needed for the holiday. So how do we, right? So basically Rav Papa says, Rava checked us out, and this is what we answered. We gave him 2 possible answers. 1, notice there was no subject there of what they were talking about. Our Mishnah is obviously talking about Chol Moed. That's what we're talking about. This Braita was talking about Erev Pesach or Erev Chag. On Erev Pesach or Erev Sukkot, you can bring something to a craftsman or you can bring something home from a craftsman. That's a possibility. Because Erev Chag, right, I'm going on Erev Chag to buy my matzahs. I'm going anyway to the main drag. I can go bring something in that I need that I don't really need for the holiday, but I can bring it in because it's Erev Chag. It's not the holiday yet. Right, we're obviously going to be more lenient. Another option we brought was Hava Cholosh Moed. They're both talking about Chol Moed. The difference is Kamba Mamino, Kama She'eno Mamino. The difference is it a trustworthy place? If it's not a trustworthy place and you're worried it'll get stolen from there, then you're allowed to bring it home. Otherwise, you're not. We're going to have a problem with this one because it doesn't explain how you can bring it there. We'll get back to that very shortly. The Hatanya, and now starting on a bet. The Hatanya, here's a proof for the second answer. Mivi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman, kigon kab mi beit ha'kadal, kos mi beit ha'zagag. You can bring kelim from the Beit HaUman, from a craftsman, like a jug from the jugger, from the place where they make jugs, from a cup from the glass maker. Avalot semel mi Beit HaTzaba. You can't bring wool from the house of where they're making wool. Velo kelim mi Beit HaUman, and not utensils from the craftsman. Here we have something new. If they don't, let's say, you brought your car to the musach, to the garage to get it fixed. Bring it to the mechanic. The mechanic is desperate for the money. So you can't pick up your car on Chol Moed according to this, right? Unless you need it for the Moed. Let's assume you have another car, you don't need it. So you leave your car there, right? Let's say they gave you a loaner car. That's a better example. They gave you a loaner car, so you definitely don't need it. But he needs the money. So you're allowed to pay him, but you have to leave the car there. Okay, which is a little bit not protecting yourself. What if he decides to not give you back the car, right? Usually we use the money as a way to ensure that you get it back. But basically, if the person needs the money for food, then you're allowed to pay them, but you leave it there. Ve'im eino mamino, this is the part of the Braita that's important for our purposes. But if you don't trust the person, meaning you're worried it'll get stolen from there, minicho b'bayit hasamuchlo, you leave it in the closest house to that person near where it is. And here comes, what if you think it's going to get stolen from there? Then you're allowed to even bring it home. Okay, so what do you see here? They're both talking about Chol Moed. The first one, our Mishnah was talking about in a case where you trust the person, where right, you can't bring it. And this one, it said Mivi'im, you can bring them from Beit HaUman if you're worried it's going to get stolen. To which the Gemara says, as I mentioned before, Teiratzte Mivi'im Molichin Kasha. If you, did I skip again? Oh, I skipped some words because they're in parentheses. Okay, I skipped those words on purpose because they're in parentheses that they're not read. The mefanim lechatzer acherev v'meino mamino, those words, they're in parentheses. That's why I skipped them. Okay, now, if I skipped other words, tell me, but I don't believe so. Okay, now, we say the following. According to the first interpretation, difference between Erev Chag and Chol HaMoed, you can easily explain why you're even allowed to bring something that's said in that Braita. But Mivi'in, if you say everything's Chol HaMoed, it's just a matter, do you trust the person they'll get stolen or not? Well, then why are you allowed to bring something to them that has nothing to do with anything? So basically, they say Mivi'in, right? Teratztam Mivi'in, you explain that, but Bolichin doesn't make any sense according to your interpretation. De Katane, Mivi'in, V'koshken she'em Molichin, right? When it's said by us, you can't bring, right? Obviously, you can't bring home. Obviously, you can't bring there. So how can you explain this distinction between the Braita and our Mishnah? Therefore, they say, the first answer must be a better answer. 14th is the Braita, and Chol HaMoed is the, right, 14th is Erev Chag, versus the Mishnah, which is talking about, and that resolves everything. And that basically means, again, I'm going anyway to town because I have other things to do. I can bring if I want. I have a machine that needs fixing. I have something, my shoes aren't, and I don't plan to get it back for the holiday, but I can bring them in on Erev, on Yud Dalet. That's allowed. But it won't be allowed on Chol HaMoed at all. New Mishnah. Mechapin et haktziot bakash. You can cover figs. Figs were drying out, often dried out figs, and you were worried about the rains coming. So you can cover them with straw. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af ma'abin. You can even do me'abin, which comes from aveh thick. We're going to have to explain what that means. Two different interpretations in the Gemara. So let's leave it for right now. Mochrei perot ksut v'kelim. Second case in the Mishnah, if you're selling fruits, food, or vessels, mochrin bitzin aletoch hamoed. You can sell them, but more privately. We'll see later what it means to sell them privately. You can't sell in a normal manner. If it's, and again, only if people need it for the holiday. Hatsayadim, the hunters. Hadashashot, the people who thresh. Hagarosot, the people who grind grisim, right? They grind all sorts of grains. Osim b'tzin alatorach hamoed. Again, you could do it privately, not publicly, and only for the purposes of the holiday, for whatever you need. Rabbi Yossi Omer, hemechmiru alatzman. These people were stringent. We don't know what they were stringent about, what he's talking about. Does he agree with them? Does he not agree with them? We don't really know what he means. We're going to leave it right now and get to it in the Gemara. The first thing we're going to do is define what is mechapin and what is me'abin. Okay, that again, there's machloket Tanakama, who says you can only do mechapin. Rabbi Yehuda says you can even do ma'abin. So Rabbi Chia, Bar Abi, and Rabbi Asi disagree about it. Travay and Mishmei Chizkiah, Rabbi Yochanan, they both disagree about what Chizkiah, Rabbi Yochanan said. We don't know who says what. It's taking straw. Mechapin is putting it in a very loose manner, and ma'abin is making a thick covering where they're all close to each other and making a more serious covering. Okay, and that's the machloket. Are you allowed to do a more serious covering for your fruits? To cover it with straw, it doesn't matter. Thick, thin, right? However you do it, with a lot of straw, little straw, close together, not close together. That's all in the first category that's permitted by everyone. Ma'abin osinoto kiminkri. What Rabbi Yehuda permits is to pile up all the figs together, right? If you just have the figs all out on the ground and then you cover them with straw, that's one thing. But to bring them all up into one pile so that you have, your cover will be a better cover because everything's together, then that's already more labor to do that. And that's what only Rabbi Yehuda permits, not Tanakama. Tanya Namihachi, a Braita to support this reading, Ma'abino, Sinoto Kiminkri, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. There's a Braita that says exactly what Ma'abin is, and according to the second interpretation. Mochrei perot ksut v'kelim mochrim b'tzina. So now, Ibayel, we ask a question about selling stuff. Again, a question. What does Rabbi Yossi say mean when he says this? Is it the Mishnah had said you have to do it privately, but you can sell. And maybe Rabbi Yossi is saying people were stringent and they didn't work at all. And it basically means that Rabbi Yossi is coming to say, I think you should be more stringent and I don't think you should really work on Chol HaMoed, even if it's things that are L'tzorach HaMoed. Oh, Dilma. Or maybe Tahavu Avdi B'tzina. Maybe he's saying the fact that they said in the Mishnah you have to do it privately, that's a chumrah. And then what does it mean? They're just being machmir. You don't need to do that. You can even sell in a normal way because you're a fruit store, you're a clothing store. People need these things for the holiday. So, and then it comes that Rabbi Yossi is basically saying, I don't agree with you that you're so stringent, and it's actually permitted. Okay, so there's a big difference in what Rabbi Yossi ends up with according to these interpretations. So the best way to figure this out is bring a braita where Rabbi Yossi says something that makes it very clear what he means. Tashma. We're going to see three categories of things one can't do, and Rabbi Yossi's response to each one. We're bringing in a braita. Those who sell fruit, clothes, and vessels, you're allowed to sell them in private. That's what our Mishnah said. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Tagarei Tveria, the merchants in Tveria, they were stringent and didn't sell it all. They basically took the week off. Okay, so now what do you see? Rabbi Yossi clearly thinks, means better not to do this, or there are those who don't do this at all. And he's basically opting for the stricter interpretation. He's not saying you have to, but he's saying it's good to be stringent. Sadeh chayot ofot v'dagim, people who capture animals, right? Trap animals, birds, or fish. Sadim b'tzinal letzorach hamoed, they can do this in private. Rabbi Yossi Omer, and for the purposes of the holiday, Rabbi Yossi says, Sadeh ako einich mi'ol atzman shelo yid sadin kol ikar. By the way, you can see what each, right? In Tveria, they were merchants. In Akko, which was on, right, I mean, they were both on the water, but Akko was known for fishing a lot, and they would fish and other things, other animals. We'll see what that is soon, but threshing these kind of things. And again, Rabbi Yossi says, okay, Tzipori was known for having lots of grains there and fields. Those in Tzipori, the threshers, they wouldn't work at all. Now we just want to, so there you see, he was machmir, okay? Not the more lenient opinion where he was saying these people are machmir and you can even do it, but for Hesya, no, he didn't think you could do it publicly. Now we want to define, okay, what we have a lot of today is a lot of questions, like what if, and then we have also definitions, words that we don't know. Amar by chilka is chada l'tarte, it's splitting the grain in half. We're talking about wheat kernels, splitting them in half. Targis, chada l'tlat, 1 to 3 parts, and tisne is chada l'arba'a, 1 in 4 parts. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar kunata, no, chilka is not wheat, it's kosemet, it's spelt, or some people define it some other way, but it's some other grain. Meitive, now we're going to bring a question on Rav Dimi. Chilka targis v'tisne, tzmayim b'chol makom. They're always susceptible to impurity. In order to become susceptible to impurity, remember this halacha, you need to have water or one of the 7 liquids come on top of it. Anytime you see these chilka, targe, tisne, whatever they are, you know that already water's come upon them. So bishlama, this works very well. That it's a grain that was cracked into different parts. Why? Because they would soften it by, how do you crack a grain? You soften it first in water. So that means it came in contact with water already. Because it became susceptible with the liquid. Right? If it's just a grain of kosemet, that doesn't, no water got on it, you can't assume. So they say, no, they peeled them. The only way to peel them is to first soak them in water. So also you can assume, we're talking about peeled grains. But what doesn't make sense? Chilka sounds like to split. So why did they call it chilka if it's kosemet? Because you took part of it off, because you took the peel off, the shell. Another question on Rav Dimi. If you say, I'm not going to have dagam, which are grains, what does dagam mean? Asur. If you say, I won't have that, well, asur, umutar belach. You can have ful, it's a type of bean, which they put in the category of grains here, which is dry, but if it's moist already, it's not called dagan. Mutar ba'orez, because that's not dagan, and bechilka v'targis v'tisne. So again, it's one that's split. Shapir did not go mitorat dagan because it's already not called grains once it's split. If you say it's kosemet, that's one of the daganim, that's called dagan. So kasha, this in fact is a question on Rav Dimi. Now we have a story. Rav Huna Shari Lulahanu Krufiyata. He allowed these people who sold spices. He allowed them to sell in their totally normal manner. Now we're going to have a question. Remember the cardo, if you've ever been there? It's basically stores that are in, right? There's pillars and they're kind of hidden. The entrance is hidden away. It doesn't open directly to the public domain. So it's already somewhat private. Because of that, they say, if you have a store that's open to this stav, potech v'noel kidarko, you can open and close all your doors in your store and open them, no problem. But because it's already more private. Because If you have two doors, one has to be shut and you can only open one door. That's the way of being more private. So Erev Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag Motziu Ma'ater et Shukei Ha'ir B'Peirot B'Shvil Kvod Yom Tov Ha'achron. Then you can take everything out and do it very publicly because it's to decorate with fruits, right? The Shukei Yerushalayim. What do you see here? Mipnei Kvod Yom Tov Ha'achron in Shalom Mipnei Kvod Yom Tov Lo. Seems like if it's not for Kavod Yom Tov, you can't do it. So how did he say you could sell their spices any way they wanted? Lo kasha b'peirei habetzavlin. Fruits last much longer than spices. Spices go bad very quickly. So spices are clearly, we're talking about fresh spices, obviously, they're clearly needed for the holiday, as opposed to fruits, which are not necessarily needed for the holiday. That has to be sold more privately. And with that, Hadron Alach Mishafach, we'll just start the first line of the Mishnah. Elu Megalchim b'Moed. Now starting a new chapter, we're now talking about who is allowed to shave on Chag, on Chol HaMoed. Habami Medinat Hayam, this is similar to what we saw before. If you came from abroad, and right from a different city, and you're all disheveled, you're allowed to shave. Habami Beit HaShivya, you were a hostage, right? You were taken into captivity. Hayotzemi Beit HaAsurim, you came out of jail. Haminudeh, we're going to get into all Nidoy laws of someone who was excommunicated, and the excommunication ended then. Shitiru lo Chachamim, that the rabbis let him out of Nidoy. Okay, that's excommunication. You can listen to Daf Shalahem, they talk all about it. Someone who asked, they basically said, I'm not going to shave. They took a neder and then they went to a chacham to undo the neder on Chol HaMoed. They're allowed to shave. A nazir and a mitzvah who finished their impure days and now they're getting to their pure day. They're pure now and they have to shave in the process. They're allowed to shave. So all these people are allowed to shave. We'll start tomorrow with who can wash and launder their clothes. Have a great day, everybody.